um, the really interesting thing for me is how you made the decision to get out of banking.
Well, I never really made the decision to get into banking. When I was a student, from my early years, before I was a teen, I would write letters to local newspapers about something I was irritated about, and I'd get it published, much to my surprise. And then in my early to mid teens, I used to take the Reader's Digest, and I used to find these little lines, little one liner things quite funny, humour in uniform, things like that. And I started writing. You get £5 if they're published. I started writing these little funny bits for the Reader's Digest, and I got them published, which topped up the pocket money. And so I thought I wanted to be a journalist, and my father said I had to get a proper job. So he said, you need to go in a bank because you don't have any engineering acumen like me. So
Is that what he was, engineer?
he was an armaments designer, and so of course I was a pacifist, and I was busy marching to Aldermaston, and he was busy designing guns to blow up the world, and bombs. He worked with Barnes Wallis. He was on the bouncing bombs and all. And
Did you work down here on the supersonic
no,
flight?
no, no. He did bombs and guns on battleships. Is what he did.
So he worked at Vickers?
Yes, he worked for Vickers. Yes. So anyway, I was persuaded to go into a bank, and I knew it was going to be deadly dull. Seeing all that money and not getting paid much to look after it. So I dutifully did my banking exams at night school. No day release, no employer cooperation in those days. And then felt I had to escape. So
what was the decision to leave it?
well, I think a divorce, really. Wrong job, wrong wife, wrong house, wrong everything. Just really following those sort of late 50s post-war patterns of doing what your parents did. Sort of like lambs to the slaughter, and then having to unravel it all.
So what was the moment that the unravelling began?
Well, the moment when the unravelling began was when I was sitting in the office of the bank in Lombard Street in the City of London, bored, and I'd done all my work, and I had a bit of time on my hands, so I pulled out a paper and magazine. It was a few days old, and it was the first edition of a colour supplement. And I started thumbing through this, and there was this picture accompanying an article about the Playboy Club, which had just opened. So this was 1966, and the article was about Playboy and Hefner and the glamour of gambling and this sort of club over 5-6 floors in Park Lane. And the full page, right-hand page, a full page photograph of an Anglo-Indian bunny, cocktail bunny. There's a difference. The cocktail bunnies wore these sort of corset-like costumes, and the croupier bunnies they had to be covered up to conform with the Gaming Act. So I looked at this wonderful creature, and whose name was Katie, and I thought, wow, Then I looked at the young lady who was working beside me, and I thought, well, this all looks a bit different. It's much more exciting than this job. So anyway, I didn't think too much about that anymore, except I tore the photo of this girl out of the paper, out of the magazine, and being 23, you do things like that. And now being 69, I've still got it. And I then pirate radio was going, and so I escaped to pirate radio. I thought Radio Caroline sounded all right, and so I bluffed my way into a job there, and then Radio London offered to pay more, so I jumped ship and went there.
These were offshore, weren't they?
Yeah, off the Essex coast.
They're drill rigs.
And no, they were old minesweepers, American minesweepers. And they were sitting on the sands, the sandbanks. So when you had really bad storms, they would sometimes bounce on the bottom, hit the sandbank. And that's how one of them dragged its anchor, mi amigo. And then in 1968, the British government outlawed pirate radio because everybody wanted it and it was so good. And they decided the BBC could do it, so they created Radio 1. And we were all offered jobs at Radio 1, and then by degrees they got rid of most of us because they had old people like Jack DeManio and Jimmy Young who could do it better and cheaper. So there I was, still getting this divorce, and having a good time with pirate radio, but had to get a proper job. See, back to what my dad said. I shouldn't have left that bank. So, chatting with a friend of mine, who got me to paint her house to give me something to do, because the BBC had said, we don't want you anymore. And she showed me a copy of the London Evening Standard and said, look, there's an advert in here for croupiers at the Playboy Club. I said, well, I don't know anything about gambling. I don't come from a family that's played cards or gambled, backed horses or anything. I don't know anything about it. I couldn't do that. Oh, look, it's quite good money while you're training, and why don't you give it a whirl? So I did. I applied, and much to my surprise and possible annoyance, I was invited for an interview, and I passed that, and started a 3-week training course, and there were about 40 of us, mainly women, very beautiful young women, and probably about, I don't know, 6 or 10 men, so 25% of us male. And we started to learn the games and how to handle chips and calculate enormously complicated bets, sort of American roulette and blackjack. And you had the edge, the house's edge was very small, probably 1.5%, 2.5% max. So you made your money by speed. So we were trained to be very dexterous and mentally agile. You do so many transactions as a croupier that you only work probably 40 minutes on the table and then 20 minutes off. I once did a calculation, actually. There was many thousands, many tens of thousands of transactions you would do during the course of a shift, an 8-hour shift, mental transactions alone. Anyway, I passed the training. Every day we would be evaluated, and it was always a nail-biting moment, although you really couldn't bite your nails because your hands had to look all right for the job. And every day people would be let go, as they now say.
Got the sack, you mean?
Got the sack, yes. Later on, I found that the bunnies, they could be sacked for not having any bunny image, and no one could define bunny image.
So who was taking the course?
They had their own in-house trainers, and the man who trained me actually came from Torquay via America. And
was it 1-to-1 then?
No, there were 40 of us, and we were trained by 2 people. So we were at various tables and in groups.
So the females and the males had to learn the same skills?
Yes. And every day, some would be sacked, as you said.
It's like that Agatha Christie story, where they keep getting killed.
Yes. And I kept staying. But also, imagine going in every morning and not knowing if that was your last day. And also getting to like it the more you were there, because it was kind of a glamorous environment. So although the clubs were shut, the part we were in was a training room, but the club didn't open till the afternoon, and we didn't see any of the real action. Anyway, after 3 weeks, I passed. So I was then given a uniform, a brown jacket with black silk edging and an horrible orange shirt and black trousers and brown shoes. You can see Americans have real taste. And the bunny cufflinks, which I still have. And the heads had to face forwards on both cuffs. You had to have them the right way round. And I started on the floor, as they call it. And after about 3 weeks, I was promoted to an inspector because they really didn't want blokes dealing the games. It was all about bunnies. So I was promoted to an inspector, which meant I was responsible for managing 3 tables in a pit. An area of tables is called a pit. These are all Americanisms. So that was all right. So I got quite a hefty pay rise when I passed the test, passed the training, and here I was. And I was going into work one evening. The entrance was in Stanhope Gate for the staff, and we had this sort of creaky old lift in the building. This was a building, Park Lane, 45 Park Lane, had been John Bloom's headquarters, the washing machine king. Rolls washing machines. Anyway, Stanhope Gate, creaky old lift, which had one of these concertina doors that you can see through. And there was a concertina door in the building, and then there was a concertina door on the lift when it arrived. So went into the lift, just me, and the men's changing room, locker room, was on the 6th floor, and the bunny room, where the girls all congregated and were managed by the bunny mother, was on the 5th floor. And in between there were 2 levels of casinos and restaurants and a nightclub. So on the 2nd floor, which was the VIP lounge, which was this sort of the ritziest restaurant area and bar, the very Katie who I had seen in 1966 stepped into the lift, cocktail bunny, quite short, and looking divine. So she was obviously going on a break, so we were standing in the lift, and all of a sudden she started undoing the laces at the side of her costume, these bunny costumes laced at the side, and pulled out her rather voluminous breasts and said, "Here, hold these, will ya?" And this was wonderful because there's this lovely Anglo-Indian featured young woman, probably 22 or 3, and the accent just didn't go with the look. It was a kind of, the sophistication wasn't what I expected, I suppose. So, but worse, I've now got my hands full, and with this lift that you can see through, and we're creaking up the floors. So she's busy making all sorts of fine adjustments to the laces and this corset. It was really like a corset, this costume. It was really sort of like a suit of armour. So she made some adjustments and then said, "Here, pop 'em back in, will ya?" So, well, I did. And this was really just, it seemed to be seconds before we clanked our way to the 5th floor, and then she stepped out and went off to the bunny room, and I pressed the button and went on up to the next floor. And I thought, was that real? Because I was thinking back to this magazine story, and I walked into the croupier's, inspector's changing room, locker room, and my immediate superior, boss, Tony, said to me, because it was 8 o'clock at night, so I was starting a night shift, 8 till 4, and he said, all right then, had a good day, sort of, because we all had got on with our lives during the day and did various things, and I said, yes, can't complain. No, it was really, but it's very funny, and I wish in a way and I've mentioned this in a book I'm writing about my peculiar life, that I've been able to tell Katie that when she stepped into that lift, that I knew all about her really, and we shared something, and I was in that lift really probably as a result of seeing her in a magazine. She doesn't know what she did for me in all senses of the word.
And you didn't see her again?
No, 165 bunnies worked at the club, different shifts, 300 of us altogether, inspectors, catering staff, whatever. No, we very rarely saw each other because of the shift work, infrequently, and I never ever saw her again.
Does,
Lucky for her, probably.
when did the club finish?
When you mean finish time or finish as a club?
As a club.
In 19, I think around the late 70s or the early 80s, when there was a bit of a scandal because they were, their security team, who were usually ex-police officers, so no surprises with what I'll say next, were getting car numbers. They were going around to other casinos and taking the car numbers and searching the DVLA register to get the owner's details, and then they were the Playboy Club was approaching those people to become members. So this poaching people by illegal means was not allowed. So the Gaming Act came down heavily on Playboy, and they had to close the operation, which was the only profitable bit. Playboy London, all the American clubs were losing money. Not all of them were casinos because of the laws in America, but Playboy London made more money than all the rest of the clubs in the world. So to lose it was quite a blow for them. And Victor Lowndes, who was the managing director of the London club, was only a 3% partner of Hugh Hefner, and yet he was a multi-millionaire from the London club, and actually married one of the bunnies who was in my pit.
Gosh, so what, you left that for another casino, did you?
Yes, it was never, I started dating a bunny, a croupier bunny, who was an Irish-American model, had been an Irish-American model, and it was not allowed. Here's one of the anomalies of Playboy. It was not allowed for staff to intermingle. And yet, every 3 months, as a reward for all our work, they would host they'd close the club early on a Sunday night and host a wonderful party through the night with great entertainers, food and drink. I calculated then, so back in 1969, it cost £8,000 to run one of these parties, so it's every 3 months. But there, everybody would be, commingling, because you weren't allowed to take wives, girlfriends, or mistresses, or lovers, or whatever. So they encouraged it, and then the security people would see who was getting off with who, and then there'd be a massive sacking going on. So I fell foul of one of these sackings, but having been sacked from Playboy was no problem, because it was known to be the best training in London. So you got a job straight away, and you just walk round the corner to the next club and you got a job. So I went off to the Curzon House Group and started there as an inspector. And then I was headhunted by the Ladbroke Group, who had been in horse racing, as you know, and then decided to go into casinos because they could see they'd make a lot of money out of casinos. And they set up 2 West End clubs and 3 provincial clubs. And I went to them as a manager, trainee manager, and then became a manager. So I went from the bottom to the top of the industry in about 18 months.
Wow.
And I don't know why. I can only say that I really like the business, and I think, and I was good with people, I was good with the staff, and I was good with the customers. So it worked for me. and I stayed in gaming until I really had enough of shift work.
Okay, so Mike, what happened if people were caught cheating? I mean, were you taught methods of watching for cheating?
Yes, one easy way to cheat is to, especially on American roulette, is to dealers tend to spin the ball up in, even though the roulette wheel has a lot of deflecting things in it, in the circumference of it, which deflect the ball all over the place. Dealers will spin at a certain speed. There's a certain rhythm, and they will spin sections of the wheel unwittingly. The ball will tend to drop in certain areas, and an experienced punter will watch for that. That's why the dealers are changed regularly. That's why they're changed every 40 minutes, so that it gets around that. It's one of the reasons. And people who watch dealers will then place late bets. So they'll suddenly put a very late bet or on the roulette table, and they may well, have a bet put on just as the ball's about to drop. They're watching it to the very last minute, and one of the things you say as an inspector is no more bets. And if that bet goes on, you then as the inspector have to decide whether to allow it or take it off. Remember, the table is covered in chips and stacked high. You're watching a huge amount of potential transactions there. And so that's one thing. You've got to watch for a late bet going on because they think they know where the ball will drop, and sometimes they're right. So you're watching for that kind of a player. You're also watching for the player who will claim when the croupier has swept the losing bets off the table, will say that they had a bet on that winning number, and the croupier's knocked it off accidentally. So you've got to, as an inspector, you've got to have a photographic memory almost of the table, and you are calculating all the time. You're calculating the bets on the table while the ball's spinning. You're watching what it's likely.
You didn't use Polaroid camera or anything to take a picture just before
cameras in the casino, but that wasn't instant replay then.
No.
The cameras were more there to watch, not to watch cheating, but to watch the money. Making sure the money went in the drop box. Croupiers didn't have any pockets. All pockets were sewn up. You weren't allowed to carry anything to stop you palming any money. So
what happened? Did you have any very big bets?
Yes, we had different value tables. There were high stake tables and low stake. American roulette and blackjack, which is pontoon 21. Low stake tables in the clubs I worked in were £1 up. Clubs like Charlie Chester's, Vic, they'd be 25p, or 5 shillings, whatever it was then. And the high stake tables would go from £5 up, and maybe £100. If you had a group of very wealthy customers come in, they might ask if they could have a table with £100 minimum, and you'd set up a special table for them. French roulette, which is a much nicer game to watch. It's on a table about the size of a snooker table, and the croupiers have rattos. It's a big table. They need a rake to put all the bets about. That's a much grander game and a higher stake game. And then the biggest stakes of all are on the baccarat and punter banco tables.
So what sort of bets did you see?
Well, we had a house limit because you do. Bets of up to £5,000, a spin or a turn of the cards was not uncommon. And the greater part of the money coming into the casinos was in cash, and particularly Arab customers would have sealed envelopes of £20 banknotes, they were in those days, and they would have pocketfuls of them. I mean, every pocket would have all these sealed bank envelopes which they'd give to us, and we'd have to undo them and count the money out on the table. There's a way of fanning the money out, so again the camera can see all the cash. Huge amounts of money that way coming in, and
So did you lose occasionally?
Oh yes,
Or
often.
not?
When Ladbrokes started the casino operation, Cyril Steen, its chairman, had very successfully built up the betting shop business. He knew horse racing, and I was taken on with about 4 other managers. We had 2 clubs. There were 4 of us who were the permanent managers, and then we had assistant managers. And we went into a huge loss-making run, night after night, day after day, dropping, maybe losing 50,000 a day. And Steen couldn't believe it. You know, all the money that was being made in the betting shops was evaporating through these 2 casinos, and he was online to buy Leeds and Leicester and Caesar's Palace at Luton. They were all lined up to be opening, and he was getting very nervous. And he used to say to us, "I can't understand it. There must be a fiddle going on, a fraud. There's something. It can't be right." And we said, "It's okay. It will come right. There's nothing going wrong here. It's just how it is. It's just as the customers are very superstitious, I discovered that casino owners can be very superstitious." And he stayed with it. He had the funds to stay with it, obviously. And then it did turn round, and and then it started making millions. So didn't hear any more
Did
about it.
you stopped one scam, didn't you?
Yeah, there was a long running, not at that time, but shortly after we turned the corner and started making profits. There were 2 Americans who we knew had played at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas because we checked them out, and we knew that they were a little bit of a concern there. They were playing Punta Banco, which is a card game where the shoe is passed around the table, so the punters deal the card in turn, and you usually have 1 or 2 inspectors on the game. It's a big table, big oval table, and these people were unnaturally successful, and they were taking money off the game, and we couldn't figure out how. And then we realised that one of the inspectors on the table was giving them some signals, very subtle signals, because he was walking around watching other people's cards.
Yes.
And I realised that he was giving them an advantage, so we had to deal with that. And whilst we couldn't pursue the players, they were just barred, and all the other clubs notified. We did prosecute the inspector, and so that was one particular.
Yes, and you must have had a lot of criminal types and
I was
oh,
once I
celebrities.
was it was the time of Rackman, who was the rogue landlord in London, who was a dreadful man, who was part of the mob party. He was all caught up with the Crays and the Richardsons, and his sort of second in command was a guy called Peter Davis, who was a big villain. And Peter Davis used to come into the clubs in the afternoons and play blackjack. And one day Peter had a bad run of luck. He was taller than me, a thuggish sort of a guy, and he ran out of money, and he didn't have a credit with us, and he told me that he wanted to cash a cheque, and I said, well, there was strict criteria under the Gaming Act as to what we could do with these things, and I said I couldn't cash a cheque for him, and he picked me up off my feet by my lapels, and told me that it was in my interest to cash a cheque for him if basically I wanted to see the next day. So I made an exception, and he lost that. But as soon as he'd left the club, I took steps to have him barred, and I'm still here.
It's a risky business. And you had people like Polanski.
Roman Polanski was a regular visitor at the club. I was there one early evening, when he was sitting with Victor Lowndes, this is at Playboy, and discussing, sitting behind me. I was in the blackjack pit, and restaurant was behind me, and he was sitting right against the dividing rail where I was, and he was just talking about the Sharon Tate murders. His wife had just been killed by the Manson gang, and this was big news at the time, and he was going into the detail of that in some way.
And Nixon?
David Nixon came in. A lot of people won't remember David Nixon now, I suppose, Andrew, but David Nixon was a panellist on What's My Line. He was a conjurer, very identifiable, bald-headed, youngish man, and he would come into the club after doing a show somewhere, and everybody knew him, and he would sit at the blackjack table, and he would palm the chips. They disappear up his sleeve. Cards would disappear up his sleeve, and he would, but always with a wonderful twinkle in his eye, and never with any intent to defraud. It was just his way of having fun, and we loved him, and he loved it.
Yes.
I can tell you another very quick story. Something that surprised me. Interested me. I was on a high stakes table one night. I think it was £10 minimum stake blackjack table, and the croupier the bunny hadn't turned up, so I was the dealer on this table. It was a Sunday night, and Tony Curtis came in, and he came and sat at the table. So I made sure he'd got what he needed, and soft drink, and I can't remember if he had cigarettes or not, but he started talking to me about how he'd started his life in America as a blackjack dealer, and we had a long conversation about that, and it ended up no one else came to play, and he only wanted to play on the high stake table, and no one else came in. It was quiet Sunday evening, so he got up to leave after maybe 3/4 of an hour, and said, "I'm having a party at my house in Connaught Square next Saturday. Come along, bring someone," and gave me the address, and I went, and his daughter, whose name now escapes me, Jamie Lee. His daughter Jamie Lee was there. It was quite a young child almost at that time. But this magnificent house, again about 5 floors, crammed with the most wonderful art and antiques, and just amazing, an amazing party. So that was a chance conversation that led to a pretty good night out. And I took Rhoda, my Irish American girlfriend, and that was good. Yeah.
Excellent. So the Lord Lucan as well, you knew?
Lucan was a prolific gambler, and he ran around with a crowd. Alexander Hesketh, who's now leader of the House of Lords, Baron Hesketh, Charlie Spencer Churchill. There's a whole crowd of these people, and they all would sort of do the clubs at night. And Lucan he lived to gamble, and he was a very tall, distinguished-looking man, very aristocratic, foppish in manner. Came a lot to the casino in the afternoon on his own. He'd come back at night with his other chums, but he'd come in the afternoons on his own and play blackjack, and quite liked to play on his own on the table. He didn't need other people. And I got to know him pretty well, conversationally. And then, after I'd left the gaming industry, there was this dreadful murder of his children's nanny, Sandra Rivet. And I just couldn't figure that he had the capability to commit this murder. Shortly after the story of how he disappeared is well known, and all his friends and some of those people I just mentioned and other people like Bob Sweeney, the Shan Kids, they all closed ranks and they definitely helped him get away. Shortly after all of this, I happened to meet a young woman who was the secretary to his wife's solicitor, and Veronica Lucan was really a bit of a can of worms, and she was being very horrible about Lucan having access. There was a most awful divorce going on, having and settlement and custody, and she was. I'm sure he wasn't the easiest man to live with, but she also wasn't, I don't think, the nicest person, and so I got a lot of inside story from this woman about Veronica Lucan and what she was up to, and I just didn't feel that Lucan had the capability to murder his children's nanny, allegedly because he'd mistaken her for his wife and he'd gone to the house planning to kill his wife. And I did know that from another source that Sandra Rivett's husband was a police detective and that things weren't too happy in that camp. And for reasons I don't want to go into in any great detail, I think there would be a fair assumption that Sandra Rivett's husband might have had something to do with this murder. Subsequently, Ludovic Kennedy wrote a book about it, along with a couple of other people. Patrick Marnham did a book, I know, but Kennedy wrote a book, and he was the first person who, when I read his book, gave the opinion that Lucan possibly wasn't the murderer. So I contacted Ludovic Kennedy, and I gave him something I read in his book and something I read in Marnham's book. I saw there was something I hadn't considered, and to do with a mailbag, and I explained this to Ludovic Kennedy, who then phoned me, and we had a conversation about it, and he said, "I think you're right," and had I known that at the time, I would have put that in the book. But we both agreed that we felt that Lucan was innocent but could never get a fair trial, and Kennedy and I did exchange some correspondence, which I still have, about that. I think Lucan would he be pushing 80 now if he was alive? I think he ended up in Botswana.
But is he dead? Is he dead now?
Well, I don't think so.
No.
Maybe, may not be. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that's where he went,
Yeah.
and there's good reason to support that. But he could never get a fair trial if he came back to England.
Why couldn't he get a fair trial? Because there's too much evidence against him.
No, well, there was circumstantial evidence against him, and the media frenzy of, the Earl who murders the nanny story in the tabloids.
Yeah, but if they haven't got enough actual proof.
Well, it's not the first person that might.
Yes.
But knowing the man over the period of time I did, I would find it hard to believe that he could be driven to such a violent rage. No, he was a very weak man. A very nice man, but a very weak man, and not the sort of person that would stoop to that. Because the thing he loved more than anything was his children, so he wasn't going to put himself at risk to lose seeing his children.
Did the Cray twins come in?
No, but in a subsequent life, I had a South African girlfriend whose father was a member of the Crays gang.
Right.
Not that he was dead by the time from natural causes, by the time I met her. But yeah.
So you mixed in peculiar circles.
Strange.
It must have been a stimulating lifestyle.
It was very interesting.
Because you had to use your wits.
Yeah, you had to be on top of things all the time, yes, just keep your eyes open and be aware, and and be amused. I mean, some of the figures that you would know from the media. Graham Hill, who was world champion motor racing driver, coming into the club and asking to write a cheque, and could he borrow my pen, which was a gold Parker biro, and wrote a cheque for £15, which was really neither here nor there in the early 70s, and then put my pen in his pocket, and I didn't really like to. I mean, he might have been sort of a bit disconcerted by writing such a large cheque, but I didn't really like to ask him for my pen back, and I was a bit annoyed because it was a matching set of pencil and a fountain pen. And Lord Cohen, who founded Tesco, Tesco being Tessa being his daughter's name, Tessa Cohen, Tesco, coming in with Tesco carrier bags. In those days they were paper ones, with string handles, full of used grubby notes, and sitting at the French roulette table and dipping his hand under the table and pulling out a clutch of notes and buying chips, coming in with the takings.
And you had Arab potentates, did you?
Yes. Sultan of Brunei was one. He was a young man in his mid-20s then, and he came into the club one day, and he was telling me about he'd just got a new Lamborghini Espada, and how he'd had to go to the factory in Italy to be measured for it. He's very short, and he said they sort of make the cars to measure for you, what they did then. And then he sort of, I was going off on a break at some point, and he got the keys out of his pocket, and he said, "Here, it's parked outside, take it for a drive." So there I was, tootling around Mayfair on a weekday afternoon in the traffic, in this wonderful sort of chrome yellow car, which was about 2'6" high, I think, and not very good on the leg room. But he had a beautiful watch. I mean, he had a watch with 3 faces on it, lovely blue watch, and I think he's the richest man in the world now. And other people would come in, heads of state and ministers, Iranian, Iraqi ministers. And I remember going to another party at an Iraqi man's flat. It was in Knightsbridge, just opposite where Winston Churchill's London house was, and we went to some reception there, and a whole bunch of us stayed overnight. It was a huge flat on several floors, and the next day he said, "Oh, well, can you recommend a nice restaurant we'll go to, and out of London I'd like to see a bit." So I recommended Pitt's Cottage down in Westerham in Kent, which was a wonderful place that I liked. Booked it up, and he said, "Right." He said, "Well, my car's in the basement." We went down to the basement, and there were 3 Rolls Royces all on flat tyres and covered in dust. And he said, "Oh, well, I don't think we can use these." So I was sent off to Kensington High Street to rent a Mini. And 4 of us squeezed into a Mini and drove down to Kent.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mike. That'll do for now.
Good, yes, I'm sure it's more than enough, Andrew.
Excellent. Very good.